The thunder outside was relentless, shaking the thin window panes of the small, third-floor apartment in Brooklyn. It was a sound that usually frightened Leo. But tonight, the 5-year-old was fast asleep, clutching his worn-out teddy bear, oblivious to the storm that was about to break down their front door. Elena brushed a stray lock of hair from her son's forehead, her fingers lingering on his warm cheek. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she ran away from that cold, sterile clinic, where Julian had paid the doctors to fix the mistake. She had chosen poverty over murder. She had chosen Leo. A heavy, frantic pounding on the front door shattered the silence. Elena froze. No one visited her at this hour. The pounding came again. Louder. Demanding. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked to the door. Grabbing the baseball bat she kept behind the umbrella stand, she peered through the peephole. The bat clattered to the floor, rolling away with a hollow wooden sound. Elena unlocked the deadbolt with trembling hands and swung the door open. The hallway light flickered, illuminating the man standing there. He was soaked to the bone, his bespoke Italian suit ruined by the deluge, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but those eyes, steel gray and devoid of warmth, were exactly as she remembered. Julian Thorne, the devil himself. Julian didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past her, his wet shoes squeaking on the cheap linoleum. He looked around the cramped living room with a mixture of distaste and desperation before his gaze landed on the closed bedroom door. Elena stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Her voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous calm. "Get out, before I call the police." Julian laughed. A dry, humorless sound that scraped against the air. "Police, I own the precinct." "Elena, we need to talk. Now." Elena crossed her arms, her nails digging into her skin to keep from shaking. "We have nothing to talk about. You made that clear when you wrote a check for my abortion and told me to disappear." Julian flinched. Just barely. But she saw it. He reached into his soaked jacket and pulled out a crumpled file. He tossed it onto the small dining table. It slid across the surface, stopping at her fingertips. Julian's voice cracked, the arrogance slipping for a fraction of a second. "It's Mia, my daughter. She has acute myeloid leukemia. She's dying." "Elena." Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry for the child. Truly. But what does that have to do with me?" Julian stepped closer, the smell of expensive cologne and rain invading her senses. "We ran a nationwide search, the database. It flagged a match from a routine checkup at St. Francis. Jude's kindergarten 2 months ago. A partial match. A sibling match." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. Julian's eyes bore into hers, intense and predatory. "You didn't get rid of it. You kept the baby. My son. He is the only one who can save Mia. I need his bone marrow." Elena let out a sharp, incredulous breath. The audacity was suffocating. "You want the son you tried to kill? To save the daughter you had with the woman you left me for?" Julian grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "Name your price. 5,000,010. I'll give you a penthouse in Manhattan. I'll set you up for life. Just give me the boy." Elena looked at his hands on her shoulders, then up at his desperate, selfish eyes. Something inside her, the fearful girl she used to be, finally died. In her place, something much colder woke up. Elena shoved him off with a strength that surprised him. She walked to the table, picked up the file, and threw it into the trash can. Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My son is not a spare parts depot for your heir." "Julian, money. I don't want your dirty money." Julian roared, losing his composure. "She has 2 weeks, without a transplant. She dies. What do you want? Anything." Elena walked to the door and held it open, pointing to the dark. Stormy hallway. You want my son's marrow. Fine. But I don't want cash. I want you. Julian paused, confusion clouding his anger. Me. Elena leaned in, whispering into his ear, her voice as lethal as a blade. I want a wedding ring. I want 50% of Thorne Enterprises transferred to Leo's name tomorrow. And I want you on your knees, begging, every single day until the surgery is over. That is my price. Thunder crashed outside. Punctuating her ultimatum, Julian stared at her, realizing the woman he had discarded was no longer a victim. She was the executioner. The silence inside the Thorne estate was far more suffocating than the storm raging outside. Julian walked through the marble foyer, his wet clothes dripping onto the pristine floor, leaving a trail of muddy water that looked disturbingly like oil. He felt hollowed out. A man who had just signed his soul away to a woman he thought he had crushed years ago. Isabella Thorne was waiting for him in the drawing room. She looked perfect. As always, her silk robe cinched tight, a glass of vintage red wine in her manicured hand. She didn't look like a mother whose daughter was dying. She looked like a queen waiting for a tribute. Isabella swirled the wine in her glass, her eyes narrowing as she took in Julian's disheveled appearance. Well, did you buy the donor? How much did it cost? I don't care if it was $1 million. Julian, Mia needs that marrow. Julian walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a stiff whiskey, bypassing the glass and drinking straight from the decanter. He slammed it down, the crystal chiming dangerously. The donor isn't selling. She has other terms. Isabella scoffed, standing up and walking towards him. Everyone has a price. Who is this person? Some lowlife looking for a payout? Julian turned to face her. He had to say it. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. It's Elena. Elena Vance. Isabella Frozze. The glass in her hand slipped, shattering against the hard floor. Red wine splattered across the white rug like a fresh gunshot wound. That trash, the secretary you threw away. Why does she have a match for our daughter? Julian looked away, unable to meet his wife's gaze. Because the donor is her son. My son, the one I told you didn't exist. Isabella screamed. Araf. Feral sound of rage. She lunged at him, slapping him hard across the face. You liar. You said you handled it. You said she aborted it. Julian caught her wrists, holding her back as she thrashed. Stop it. It doesn't matter now. The boy is the only match. If we don't get his marrow, Mia dies in 2 weeks. Do you understand our daughter dies? Isabella went limp in his arms, sobbing dry. Angry tears. So pay her, give her the money. Julian released her and stepped back, pulling a folded document from his inner pocket, the one Elena's lawyer had emailed him 5 minutes ago. She doesn't want money. Isabella. She wants my life. Specifically, she wants your place. Isabella snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Her face went pale, then twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Dissolution of marriage. Transfer of assets. She wants you to divorce me, to marry her. She looked up, trembling. You can't be serious. You won't do it. Julian buttoned his jacket, his face hardening into a mask of defeated pragmatism. I have no choice. The surgery is contingent on the marriage certificate. If I don't marry her by tomorrow noon, she takes the boy and leaves the country. Isabella tore the paper in half and threw it at him. No, I am Mrs. Thorne. I won't be cast aside for that gutter rat. The intercom on the wall buzzed sharply, interrupting her tantrum. The trembling voice of the butler came through. Sir. Madam. There is a Ms. Elena Vance at the gate. She says she's here to inspect her new property. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian closed his eyes for a second, inhaling deeply. Elena wasn't waiting for tomorrow. She was tightening the noose now. He walked to the intercom and pressed the button. Let her in. He turned to Isabella, his voice cold and dead. Pack your things. Bella, you're moving to the guest wing. And wipe that wine off the floor. Elena hates a mess. Isabella stared at him, the realization finally sinking in. To save her daughter and her connection to the Thorne fortune, she had to step down. But as she watched Julian walk toward the door to welcome his ex-lover, Isabella's grief turned into something much darker. She grabbed a shard of the broken wine glass, squeezing it until her palm bled. Isabella whispered to the empty room, "Marry her. Julian, save Mia, and once my daughter is well, I will kill that woman myself." The private chapel on the Thorne estate smelled of stale lilies and old money. It was a cold, echoing space that felt more like a mausoleum than a place of union. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving a gray, oppressive mist clinging to the windows. Elena Vance stood at the altar, not in white, but in a dress of midnight blue silk that looked black in the dim light. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. Beside her, Julian Thorne stood stiff as a board, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. The private magistrate cleared his throat nervously, sensing the violence in the air. "We are gathered here today." Julian cut him off, his voice sharp and impatient. "Skip the preamble. Get to the signatures." Elena turned to him, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. Impatient. "Husband, we haven't even exchanged rings yet." She extended her hand, palm open, demanding. "But first, the transfer deed for the shares." As agreed, Julian signaled to his lawyer, who stepped out of the shadows with a trembling hand, offering a leather binder. Elena took a gold fountain pen, Julian's favorite pen, and signed her name with a flourish. She handed the binder to her own lawyer, who was standing guard by the door, only when he nodded, confirming the assets were secured in Leo's trust. Did she turn back to the altar? Julian grabbed her hand, shoving a diamond ring onto her finger. It was heavy, cold, and ostentatious, a shackle made of platinum. "I, Julian, take you, Elena, for better or for worse." Elena looked down at the ring, then up into his eyes. "Oh, it will be worse. Julian, I promise you that." The ceremony ended without a kiss. There was no applause, only the heavy silence of a deal sealed in blood. Minutes later, the doors to the private medical wing of the mansion opened. This was where they had set up a sterile environment for Mia. Elena knelt down, smoothing the hair of the small boy hiding behind her legs. Leo was clutching his teddy bear so hard his knuckles were white. He looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes that were a mirror image of the man standing above him. Elena whispered, "Leo, baby, remember what we talked about. You're going to be a superhero today. You're going to help a little girl." Leo nodded bravely, though he shrank back when Julian took a step toward him. Julian stared at the boy, his son, the son he had ordered to be disposed of. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. Staggering him, he reached out a hand, his voice trembling. "Hello, Leo. I'm..." Elena stood up abruptly, slapping his hand away before he could touch the child. Her voice was ice. "You are Mr. Thorne. To him, you are a stranger. Don't you dare confuse him with titles you haven't earned." Julian recoiled, his face flushing with shame and anger. But he said nothing. He led them into the sterile room. In the center of the room, hooked up to beeping machines, lay Mia. She was pale, her skin translucent, her breathing shallow. Isabella was sitting by the bedside, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw Elena enter, her expression twisted into a snarl. But she stayed seated, restrained by the necessity of the moment. Isabella's gaze fell on Leo. She looked at the healthy, vibrant boy, the evidence of her husband's infidelity, and then at her own dying daughter. Leo let go of Elena's hand and took a hesitant step toward the bed. He looked at the girl who was technically his half-sister. He didn't know the history, the hate, or the billions of dollars at stake. He just saw a sad girl. Leo reached out and placed his teddy bear on the bed, right next to Mia's hand. "He makes me brave," Leo said softly. "Maybe he can help you too." Mia's eyes fluttered open. She looked at the bear, then at Leo, and a weak smile ghosted across her lips. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She hated Julian. She despised Isabella. But in that moment, watching her son show kindness to the child of her enemy, she realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Isabella stood up, her voice trembling with suppressed rage as she looked at Elena. "Get him prepped. The doctors are waiting. If anything happens to my daughter during the harvest, I will destroy you." Elena stepped forward, shielding Leo with her body, her eyes locking with Isabella's. "If a single hair on my son's head is harmed, your daughter won't be the only one leaving this house in a box." The waiting room of the private medical wing was a vacuum of sound and air. 6 hours had passed since the doors swung shut, swallowing both children into the operating theater. Julian Thorne paced the length of the corridor for the 100th time, the rhythmic clicking of his dress shoes echoing against the sterile walls. He looked like a man unraveling, tie undone, sleeves rolled up. The confident CEO veneer stripped away to reveal a terrified father. He glanced at Elena, who sat perfectly still on a leather bench, her eyes closed, her breathing measured. She looked like a statue carved from ice. But Julian noticed her hands were clasped so tightly together that her knuckles were white. Julian stopped in front of her, his voice hoarse. "You should eat something. You haven't touched the food." Elena opened her eyes, fixing him with a gaze that could cut glass. "I don't eat with the enemy. Julian, I'm here to ensure my son wakes up. Once he does, I'm taking him back to the apartment until he's recovered." Julian flinched. "You can't. The contract. You have to stay in the residence for 6 months. For appearances." Elena stood up, smoothing her dress. "Then prepare the guest wing. I won't be sleeping under the same roof as you." Before Julian could argue, the double doors swung open. Dr. Eris, the chief surgeon, stepped out, pulling off his surgical cap. He looked exhausted but smiled. "Doctor." Eris nodded to both of them. "It went perfectly. Leo is a champion. The marrow extraction was smooth. And Mia has received the transplant. Now, we wait for the graft to take. The next 48 hours are critical." Elena didn't wait for Julian to celebrate. She brushed past the doctor and rushed into the recovery room where Leo lay, seeing her small boy hooked up to monitors, pale and groggy, broke the dam of her composure. She kissed his forehead, whispering soft reassurances until he drifted back into a drug-induced sleep. Night fell over the Thorne estate, heavy and suffocating. At 2:00 a.m., the house was silent. Elena couldn't sleep. She left Leo's bedside to find some water. As she passed the hallway leading to the intensive care unit, she saw the door to Mia's room slightly ajar. The security detail was missing, likely on a break or dismissed. "A negligence," she noted with suspicion. Elena hesitated. She should keep walking. But the image of the little girl alone in that machine-filled room tugged at her. She pushed the door open gently. Mia was asleep, her breathing raspy. The teddy bear Leo had given her was tucked under her arm. Isabella's voice sliced through the darkness from the corner of the room. "Here to finish the job." Elena jumped, her heart hammering. She hadn't seen Isabella sitting in the high-backed chair in the shadows. Elena narrowed her eyes, keeping her voice low. "I'm just checking on the patient. Unlike you, I don't wish death on children." Isabella stood up, walking slowly into the light of the monitors. She looked unhinged, hair messy, eyes wild. In her hand, she held a small, empty syringe. You don't understand, do you? As long as you are here, as long as your son is the savior, my Mia will always be second best. Julian is already looking at that boy, like he's the heir. Elena stepped back, sensing danger. What are you doing? Isabella. Isabella smiled. A terrifying, broken expression. She moved toward the IV line, dripping into Mia's arm. If Mia has a sudden reaction, a seizure caused by contaminated fluids, who do you think Julian will blame? The distraught mother, or the jealous ex-wife who was seen sneaking into the room? Elena lunged forward. Don't you dare. Isabella injected a clear liquid into the port and immediately slammed her hand down on the code blue emergency button. The room exploded with the sound of blaring alarms. Red lights flashed. Isabella threw the syringe at Elena's feet and began to scream. A blood-curdling shriek that tore through the mansion. Help, help, she's killing her. She's poisoning my daughter Julian. Elena stood frozen, the plastic syringe at her feet. As the sound of heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway, she realized too late the trap wasn't just set, it had already snapped shut. The doors to the ICU slammed open, hitting the wall with a deafening crack. Julian Thorne burst into the room, his chest heaving, followed closely by a team of nurses and Dr. Eris. What greeted him was a scene from a nightmare. The monitors were screaming a high-pitched, continuous warning. On the bed, fragile little Mia was convulsing violently, her back arching off the mattress as foam gathered at the corners of her mouth. Isabella was on her knees beside the bed, clutching the sheets, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She pointed a trembling finger at Elena, who stood motionless near the foot of the bed, the empty syringe lying innocently by her shoe. Isabella screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She did it. She injected something into the line. I tried to stop her. Oh God. Julian. She tried to kill our baby. Doctor. Eris shouted orders, pushing past Julian. Code blue. Get the crash cart, push 2 milligrams of lorazepam, move. Move. Julian stood paralyzed for a heartbeat, his gaze bouncing from his seizing daughter to the syringe on the floor, and finally to Elena. The shock in his eyes instantly hardened into a terrifying so. Mortenrage. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, grabbing Elena by the throat and slamming her back against the glass wall of the observation deck. Julian roared, his face inches from hers. What did you do? What the hell did you give her? Elena didn't struggle. She didn't claw at his hands. She simply stared into his furious gray eyes, her own gaze cold and unflinching. She knew that any sign of panic would look like guilt. Elena hissed, her voice squeezed but steady. Think. Julian. Use that ruthless brain of yours. Why would I kill the only leverage I have? If Mia dies, my son loses his inheritance. What do I gain? Isabella wailed from the floor, crawling toward Julian's legs. She's jealous. She saw you looking at me. She hates us. Look at the syringe. Julian. It's right there. Julian loosened his grip slightly, the logic of Elena's words piercing through his panic, but the sight of the syringe was damning. He bent down and snatched up the plastic tube. It was unlabeled. Generic, the kind found in any supply closet. Doctor. Eris turned from the bed, his voice sharp. Mr. Thorne, get them out. We need space to stabilize her heart rate now. Julian grabbed Elena's arm, dragging her out of the room and into the sterile hallway. He threw her toward the security guards who had just arrived. Julian pointed a shaking finger at the head of security. Lock her in the guest suite. Post 2 men at the door. No one goes in or out. Confiscate her phone. Elena straightened her jacket, maintaining her dignity even as the guards flanked her. She looked at Julian with profound disappointment. You're making a mistake. Again, you believed her lies 5 years ago. And it cost you a son. You believe her now. And it might cost you your daughter. Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If Dr. Eris finds poison in Mia's blood, I won't call the police. Elena, I'll handle you myself. Elena gave him one last, piercing look before turning to the guards. Take me to my son. I'm done talking to this fool. As the guards marched Elena away, Julian slumped against the cold wall, clutching the empty syringe in his hand until the plastic cracked. Inside the room, the flatline tone suddenly beeped into a rhythm. Mia was back, but the war had just turned nuclear. Julian looked through the glass at his wife, who was now sobbing over their daughter. For a fleeting second, he saw Isabella's eyes dart toward the door, not with relief, but with a cold, calculating assessment. A seed of doubt, dark and thorny, planted itself in Julian's heart. The guest suite was a gilded cage, silk curtains, velvet chair, and a door locked with a heavy biometric bolt. Elena Vance paced the room like a trapped tigress, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. Every minute she spent in here was a minute Isabella had to erase the evidence and poison Julian's mind further. Worse, Leo was alone in the recovery wing. Vulnerable. The electronic lock beeped, flashing green. Elena spun around, grabbing a heavy crystal vase from the console table. Ready to swing, she expected Julian, coming to deliver a verdict. The door opened, but it was Marcus, the head of Thorne Security, who stepped inside. He was a mountain of a man, an ex-Marine who usually looked at Elena with professional indifference. Today, his expression was grim. He glanced at the vase in her hand and then locked the door behind him. Marcus spoke quietly, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Put it down. Ms. Vance, if I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't hear me coming. Elena lowered the vase slowly but didn't relax her stance. Did Julian send you? Is he ready to throw me in a real cell? Marcus shook his head, pulling a tablet from his tactical vest. Mr. Thorne is blinded by panic. He's not thinking straight. But I am paid to observe, not to feel, and what I observed doesn't add up. Elena stepped closer, hope flaring in her chest. You know I didn't do it. Marcus tapped the screen of the tablet. The toxicology report just came back from the lab. Mia was injected with a high dose of potassium chloride. It causes cardiac arrest. He swiped to the next image, a photo of the syringe found at Elena's feet. The residue in this syringe saline solution, salt water, harmless. Elena exhaled a breath. She didn't know she was holding. She swapped them. She injected the poison, hid the real vial, and dropped the saline syringe to frame me. Marcus nodded. Precisely. But Mr. Thorne isn't looking at reports right now. He's sitting by Mia's bed, holding her hand, while Isabella whispers poison in his ear. She claimed you switched the liquids beforehand. Elena clenched her fists. Is there camera footage? Marcus grimaced. The ICU feed malfunctioned for 3 minutes. Isabella knows where the blind spots are. However, he tapped the screen again, bringing up a grainy black and white feed. She forgot about the corridor cameras. This is from 5 minutes before the code blue and... Elena watched the screen intently. In the video, Isabella was rushing down the hallway toward Mia's room. She paused by a large, antique Chinese porcelain vase standing near the entrance. She looked left, then right, and quickly shoved a small glass vial deep into the decorative dried flowers inside the vase. Elena looked up, her eyes blazing. The real vial, with her fingerprints on it. Marcus checked his watch. The morning cleaning crew starts their rounds in 12 minutes. That vase is on their list to be emptied and dusted. If they find that vial, it goes in the trash, and your proof is gone forever. Elena moved toward the door. I need to get out of here. Now, Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside, disengaging the lock on the door panel. My shift log says I'm currently doing a perimeter check of the grounds. I won't see you leave. You have 10 minutes before the next patrol passes that hallway. Don't get caught. Elena, if Julian sees you, he'll think you're fleeing. Elena paused at the doorway, looking back at the stoic guard. Why are you helping me? Marcus adjusted his earpiece. A faint, rare smile touching his lips. Because 5 years ago, I was the one who drove you to the clinic. I saw you run out the back door to save your son. A woman who fights that hard for her child doesn't kill someone else's. Elena nodded once, a silent vow of gratitude, and slipped into the darkened hallway. The corridor was silent, shadows stretching long and ominous. Elena moved fast, her bare feet making no sound on the marble. She reached the corner leading to the ICU. The antique vase was there, standing like a silent sentinel. Elena reached her hand into the dusty arrangement of dried hydrangeas. Her fingers brushed against dead leaves, spider webs, and then cold glass. She grabbed the small vial. It was there. Potassium chloride. Well, I thought rats were nocturnal. Elena froze. The voice came from directly behind her. She turned slowly to see Julian standing there. He looked wrecked, shirt torn, eyes bloodshot, but the gun in his hand was steady, and it was pointed directly at her heart. Julian's hand didn't tremble. The barrel of the pistol was fixed squarely on Elena's chest, a black eye staring into her soul. The hallway was deadly silent, save for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Julian stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his weight. I told you to stay in the room, caught red-handed, creeping in the shadows. Were you going back to finish her off? Was the first dose not enough? Elena didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hands in surrender. Instead, she slowly lifted the small glass vial she had just retrieved from the vase, holding it up to the dim light. Elena spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. If I wanted Mia dead, Julian, I wouldn't be holding the evidence. I would have flushed it. Julian narrowed his eyes, glancing at the vial. What is that? Elena took a step toward the gun, a move so bold, it made Julian hesitate. This is what was really in the syringe. Potassium chloride. The hospital didn't lose it. Your wife hid it. She tossed the vial through the air toward him. Julian instinctively took his hand off the trigger to catch the small glass bottle. He looked at the label, then back at Elena. Elena pointed at the glass in his hand. It's full of fingerprints. Julian, yours aren't on it. Mine aren't on it. But I bet if you call Marcus to dust it right now, you'll find Isabella's prints all over the glass. Julian, what are you doing? Isabella's voice rang out from the end of the hallway. She had emerged from the shadows of the guest wing, wrapped in a silk robe. Her face pale, she looked at the gun, then at the vial in Julian's hand, and her eyes widened in genuine terror. Isabella stammered, her voice pitching up. She planted that I saw her. She put it in the vase. Julian looked at his wife. He looked at the fear in her eyes, not fear for Mia, but fear for herself. The pieces slammed together in his mind with the force of a train wreck. The missing security feed, the timing, the saline syringe Elena had supposedly used, and now, Isabella knowing exactly where the vial came from before he even said a word. Julian lowered the gun slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. I never said where she found it. Isabella, how did you know it was in the vase? Isabella froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She took a step back. I didn't. I just assumed. Julian walked toward her, the predator reawakening. You assumed, or you remembered? He held up the vial. Potassium chloride. You tried to stop her heart. You tried to kill my daughter just to frame Elena. Isabella broke. She fell to her knees, sobbing, grabbing at the hem of his pants. It wasn't like that I just wanted to scare them. I wanted to get rid of her. She's taking everything from me. Julian, she's taking you. I did it for us. Julian looked down at the woman he had married, the woman he thought was a sophisticated, caring partner. All he saw now was a monster. He kicked his leg free from her grasp, his expression one of utter disgust. Julian turned to the shadows behind him. Marcus. The head of security stepped out from the alcove where he had been watching, his face grim. Julian pointed at his sobbing wife. Get her out of my sight. Lock her in the cellar. And call the police. I want her charged with attempted murder before the sun comes up. Isabella screamed as Marcus hauled her up by her arm, dragging her away. Her cries of, I love you. Julian echoed down the hallway until they were cut off by the heavy thud of the service door. Julian stood alone in the hallway, the vial still clutched in his hand. He felt old. He felt dirty. He turned to look at Elena, who was still standing by the vase, watching him with tired eyes. Julian tried to speak, his voice cracking. Elena. Elena raised a hand, stopping him. Save it. You almost shot me. You almost let the real killer go free. Your apology means nothing to me right now. Elena walked past him, her shoulder brushing against his arm. She didn't look back. I'm going to sit with my son. If you come near us before morning, I will use that gun myself. The storm had finally passed, leaving the sky over the Thorne estate a bruised purple that slowly brightened into a fragile gold. Inside the recovery suite, the silence was no longer terrifying. It was peaceful. Julian Thorne stood in the doorway, afraid to cross the threshold. He had changed his clothes, washed the blood and sweat from his face, but he couldn't wash away the shame that coated his skin like a second layer. Inside the room, the partition between the beds had been drawn back. Elena Vance sat in a chair between the two beds, peeling an apple with a small knife. Her movements were precise, rhythmic, and hypnotic. She looked exhausted, dark circles bruising her eyes. But she was awake, watching over her pride. On the left bed, Leo was sitting up, looking a bit pale, but energetic. He was holding a picture book, reading aloud, or rather, inventing a story based on the pictures to the girl in the next bed. Mia was awake. The color had returned to her cheeks, faint but undeniable. She was listening to Leo with rapt attention, clutching the teddy bear he had given her. Leo pointed to a dragon in the book. And then, the dragon didn't eat the princess, because they were actually friends. See, Mia whispered, her voice raspy, but sweet. Is the dragon nice? Leo nodded vigorously. Yeah, he just looks scary. Like my mom when I don't eat my broccoli. Elena smirked, handing Leo a slice of apple. I heard that. Traitor. Julian felt a lump in his throat so painful he could barely breathe. This was the family he could have had. The family he had thrown away for ambition, and a woman who tried to kill his child. He took a hesitant step into the room. Elena didn't look up. The police report is filed. Marcus took the statement. Is there anything else? Or are you just here to ruin the mood? Julian walked to the foot of the beds. He looked at Mia, then at Leo. I wanted to see them. To see him. Leo stopped chewing his apple and looked at the tall man. He didn't know this man was his father. He only knew him as the rich guy. Julian knelt down, bringing himself to Leo's eye level. Hi. Leo. I wanted to say thank you. You were very brave. You saved her. Leo shrugged. A modest little gesture. Mom said I had to be a superhero. Superheroes help people. Julian's eyes filled with tears. He looked up at Elena, who was finally looking at him. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just cold, indifferent. Julian whispered, He made a mistake. Elena. A life-altering, unforgivable mistake. 5 years ago. And yesterday, I don't expect you to forgive me. But thank you for keeping him, for raising him to be better than I ever was. Elena stood up. Wiping the knife on a napkin, she walked around the bed and stood over him. I didn't do it for you. And as for forgiveness, you're right. I don't have any for you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, the flight itinerary she had booked an hour ago. Elena continued, her voice businesslike. The doctor says Leo can be discharged in 2 days. Once he is cleared, we are leaving. I'll manage my 50% of the company remotely. You can run the day-to-day operations. Or burn it to the ground. I don't care, but I won't raise my son in this house. Julian stood up. Panic flaring. You can't leave. Elena. You own half of everything now. And Mia needs him. Look at them. Elena looked at the children. Mia had reached out her hand. And Leo was holding it. A bond had formed. Forged in blood and trauma. It was undeniable. Elena's resolve wavered for a fraction of a second. But she steeled herself. Mia is welcome to visit. But I am not staying in a house where I was almost arrested for murder. The contract said we had to be married. It didn't say we had to be roommates. Suddenly, the door opened again. It was Dr. Eris. Looking grave. Doctor. Eris cleared his throat. Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne. We have a situation. Mia's vitals are stable. But the stress of the private incident has compromised her immune system. She needs isolation. And because the graft is so fresh, her body is reacting specifically to Leo's presence. Elena frowned. Reacting how? Doctor. Eris sighed. Positively. Her cortisol levels drop when he is near. It's psychological. But it's affecting her physical recovery. If you separate them now, she could go into regression. I strongly advise that Leo stays in close proximity for at least the next 3 months. Elena dropped the itinerary. She looked at Julian, who was trying very hard to hide the flash of relief in his eyes. Elena whispered, You have got to be kidding me. Julian buttoned his jacket, his CEO demeanor returning slightly. It seems, dear wife, that you are stuck with me, for the sake of the children. Elena glared at him, realizing the cage door had just slammed shut again. But this time, she wasn't the prisoner. She was the warden. 3 weeks had passed since the nightmare in the ICU, and the atmosphere at Thorne Enterprises had shifted from one of ruthless efficiency to terrified anticipation. The rumor mill was on fire. Julian Thorne, the untouchable wolf of Wall Street, had not only remarried his former secretary, but had handed her half the kingdom. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Elena Vance walked in. She wore a tailored white suit, sharp, pristine, and blindingly bright against the dark mahogany of the room. It was a deliberate contrast to the black she had worn at the wedding. She wasn't mourning anymore. She was arriving. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by 12 gray-haired men who had run this company for decades. When Elena entered, the room fell silent. Julian started to stand. A reflex of courtesy he hadn't realized he possessed. But Elena didn't look at him. Elena walked past the empty chair to Julian's right, the wife's seat, and continued walking. She stopped at the opposite end of the table, facing Julian directly. She placed her tablet on the surface with a decisive click. Mr. Sterling, a board member with a face like a bulldog and an ego to match, chuckled dryly. He leaned back, tapping his pen. Mrs. Thorne, lovely of you to join us. We were just discussing the quarterly projections for the Asian market. I'm sure it's a bit dry compared to whatever it is you usually do. Shopping charity galas. Elena didn't blink. She tapped her screen, casting a projection onto the main wall behind Julian. It wasn't a shopping list. It was a forensic accounting of Mr. Sterling's department. Elena spoke, her voice projecting clearly without raising a decibel. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I've been reviewing the logistics contracts for the Shanghai expansion. Specifically, the shell companies you've been funneling 15% of the budget into for the past 3 years. The room gasped. Papers rustled. Mr. Sterling's face went from smug to purple in seconds. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. This is preposterous. Julian, are you going to let your wife slander a founding member of this board? She's a secretary. She doesn't know a ledger from a laundry list. Julian stayed seated. His fingers steepled under his chin. He looked at the projection. Then at Elena. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had stared him down over a gun barrel. He realized, with a jolt of dark amusement, that he was no longer the scariest person in the room. Julian turned his gaze to Sterling. His voice bored. She's not just my wife. Sterling, she's the majority shareholder of the voting trust. And if she says you're stealing, then you're stealing. Elena smiled, a shark-like expression that mirrored Julian's own. You're fired. Mr. Sterling, security is waiting outside to escort you. Your assets have been frozen pending a federal investigation. I filed the paperwork this morning. Sterling sputtered, looking around for support. But the other board members suddenly found their shoes very interesting. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, muttering curses. Elena sat down in the chair, claiming her territory. Now that the trash is taken out, let's discuss the rebranding. I have some notes on your leadership style. Julian. Later that evening, the limousine glided through the gates of the Thorne estate. The partition was up. Julian poured 2 glasses of scotch. Offering one to Elena, she took it, swirling the amber liquid. Julian watched her, a mixture of exhaustion and arousal in his eyes. You terrified them today. Sterling nearly had a stroke. Elena took a sip, the burn of the alcohol pleasant on her tongue. Fear is a necessary tool. You taught me that. I just use it better. Julian leaned in, his voice dropping. You're enjoying this. Making me pay. Ruling my company. Controlling my house. Elena turned to face him, her eyes softening just a fraction. But the steel remained. I'm securing my son's future. Julian. And Mia's. Someone has to be the adult in this family. Since you spent 5 years playing God, I'll spend the next 5 playing the ruler. Julian reached out, his hand hovering near hers, not daring to touch without permission. And where does that leave me? Elena placed her empty glass in his hand, her touch lingering for a fleeting second. You're the consort. Julian, learn your place. And maybe, just maybe, you'll eventually earn your way back into the Queen's bed. But not tonight. She opened the door as the car stopped, stepping out into the cool night air, leaving Julian sitting in the dark, clutching her glass, realizing that his penance was only just beginning, and God help him, he was starting to like it. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was bathed in golden light, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of New York's elite. 1 year ago, the name Elena Vance was whispered with disdain or confusion. Tonight, it was spoken with reverence. Elena stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the sea of faces. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, looking less like a wife and more like a sword sheathed in silk. Her hand rested lightly on the banister, her posture regal, unshakable. Julian Thorne stood a step behind her, adjusting the train of her dress with a tenderness that would have shocked the tabloids a year prior. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble against her ear. They are waiting for you. The keynote speech is in 5 minutes. Elena turned to him, brushing a speck of lint from his lapel. Let them wait. Anticipation builds value. Besides, I'm watching them. She nodded toward the buffet table near the orchestra pit. 2 children were conspiring over a tower of macarons. Mia, now with a full head of glossy curls and rosy cheeks, was giggling as Leo, looking dashing in a miniature tuxedo, sneaked a 3rd cookie into her pocket. Julian followed her gaze, his expression softening into profound gratitude. They look like twins. Hard to believe we were measuring coffin sizes a year ago. Elena's eyes flashed with a dark memory, but she pushed it away. We don't talk about the dark days. Julian, we only look forward. A reporter from Forbes approached the staircase. Breathless and eager, Mrs. Thorne and Mr. Thorne. A moment the stock price of Thorne Enterprises has tripled since the merger of your assets. People are calling it the Vance effect. How do you respond to critics who say your management style is ruthless? Julian stepped forward before Elena could answer. His smile charming, but his eyes sharp. I'd say those critics are likely the ones my wife fired for incompetence. Elena hasn't just saved the company, she evolved it. I'm just lucky to be along for the ride. Elena smirked. Accepting the compliment as her due, she took Julian's arm, allowing him to lead her down the stairs. The flashes of the cameras went off like a lightning storm. But this time, she didn't blink. Later, on the private balcony overlooking Central Park, the noise of the party was just a dull roar behind the glass doors. Elena leaned against the stone railing, the cool night air refreshing on her skin. Julian joined her, handing her a glass of sparkling water. She had stopped drinking alcohol at events, preferring to keep her mind razor sharp. Julian looked out at the city skyline. I got the call today. Isabella's appeal was denied. She'll serve the full 15 years. Elena took a sip, her face impassive. Good. She's a footnote in our history. Julian, don't let her take up any more space in your head. Julian turned to her, placing his hands on the railing on either side of her, trapping her in a cage of his arms. But this time, it wasn't to threaten. It was to worship. And us. The contract expires next week. 1 year. You can take your 50%. Take Leo. And go. Is that still the plan? Elena looked up at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing the family he had finally learned to cherish. She saw the man who had spent 12 months atoning, learning, and bowing to her, well, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Elena reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I'm a businesswoman. Julian, I don't walk away from a profitable investment just when it's starting to yield returns. Julian let out a breath, a laugh escaping his lips. So I'm an investment now. Elena pulled him down by his tie, her lips brushing against his. You're a project, and you're not finished yet. Besides, Leo needs a father, and Mia needs a mother, and I. She paused, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. I've grown accustomed to the view from the top. It's better with company. Julian kissed her, deep and desperate, sealing a new pact. No more contracts. No more lawyers. Just blood, power, and a love that had survived the fire. Elena pulled back, smoothing his hair. Come on. We have guests to entertain. Fix your tie. Husband, we have an empire to rule. She turned and walked back into the light. And Julian Thorne, the billionaire who once bowed to no one, straightened his tie and followed his queen.